Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the warm, heavy scent of night-blooming jasmine, mixing with the salty summer breeze. Listen closely in your mind, and you might hear the slow, rhythmic clicking of amber worry beads from a corner coffee house, or the distant, static crackle of a transistor radio broadcasting a Sunday football match. Welcome back to a time when our world felt both infinitely smaller and wonderfully richer. Today, we are going to take a deeply emotional journey back to the Greece of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. We will explore 20 daily habits and forgotten rituals from our childhood that were completely normal back then, yet would seem entirely absurd or even impossible to the modern eye. Stay with me until the very end, because our final memory, a simple evening ritual of dressing up just to walk together, captures the true essence of what we have truly lost in today's fast-paced world. Before we dive into these precious memories, we must remember how differently time flowed back then. In the Greek cities and provinces of those golden decades, there was absolutely no rush. Time was not measured by digital notifications or stressful alarms, but by the natural rhythm of the sun, the ringing of the church bells, and the daily arrival of the local tradesman. Today, we are often told that life before the internet and smartphones was somehow poorer or more isolated. This is a tremendous myth. The truth is that while our pockets might have held fewer drachmas, our lives were immeasurably richer in genuine human connection. We did not have social media, so we actually socialized. We relied on the heavy rotary landline in the hallway, or simply walked down the street to knock on a neighbor's door. We valued patience. We knew how to wait for a letter, how to wait for our favorite song on the radio, and how to wait for the slow ripening of summer tomatoes. Life was an ongoing, shared experience, filled with spontaneous joy, shared hardships, and an incredible sense of community that wrapped around us like a warm, protective blanket. Let us start with the legendary Sunday family table, a beautiful ritual that anchored our entire week. The preparations began early in the morning, filling the house with the unforgettable scent of roasted lamb, potatoes soaking in lemon juice, and generous amounts of wild oregano. By 1 o'clock, the entire extended family was squeezed around a large table, usually covered with a brightly coloured, plastic checkered tablecloth. There was no such thing as personal space. Aunts, uncles, and cousins were shouting over each other, creating a chaotic symphony of overlapping conversations and bursts of loud laughter. Grandmothers hovered around, constantly piling more pasticcio or moussaka onto your plate, completely refusing to accept that you were full. The meal did not just last for an hour. It was an endurance event that stretched deep into the late afternoon. Wine glasses clinked endlessly, filled with homemade retsina that tasted like pine and summer sunshine. It was a loud, chaotic, and incredibly loving ritual where every family problem was debated passionately and ultimately solved over a shared loaf of crusty village bread. No one was staring down at a glowing screen. People looked deeply into each other's eyes, fully present in the moment, nourishing both their bodies and their souls. And now let us remember the vibrant Saturday morning ritual of washing the balconies and the pavements. Long before anyone worried about conserving municipal water, Saturday mornings were announced by the loud splashing of water from long rubber hoses. Women of the neighborhood would vigorously sweep and wash the marble balconies, sending waterfalls down to the asphalt street below. The air was filled with the distinct, nostalgic smell of wet summer dust mixed with strong, soapy water. But this was so much more than just a cleaning chore. It was the ultimate social network of the era. Women would lean over their balcony railings, holding their brooms, and chat with the neighbor directly across the narrow street. They exchanged the latest recipes, whispered the town gossip, and kept a watchful eye on everything happening below. Today, using so much water to scrub a street seems environmentally absurd, but back then, it was a literal baptism of the neighborhood. It was a fresh, sparkling start to the weekend, binding the local community together through shared physical labor and loud, cheerful conversations that echoed off the concrete walls. We absolutely cannot forget the sacred afternoon quiet hours, a tradition strictly enforced across the entire country. Between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Greece practically shut down completely. Heavy wooden shutters were drawn tight to keep out the scorching Mediterranean sun, plunging the bedrooms into a cool, peaceful semi-darkness. The usually noisy streets became completely deserted, silent except for the endless, rhythmic chirping of the cicadas in the olive trees. Grandmothers and mothers strictly enforced this silence, fiercely warning children not to make a single sound. We would lie in the shadows, feeling the crisp coolness of the cotton sheets, listening to the slow, hypnotic ticking of the wall clock. If you dared to bounce a rubber ball outside on the pavement, a sleepy, angry neighbour would definitely yell at you from a window. It was an enforced collective rest, a mandatory pause in the daily struggle that gave everyone the time to recharge and dream. Today, the idea of an entire modern nation turning off its engines and sleeping for 2 hours seems like an impossible fairy tale. Think back to the magical, starlit evenings spent at the open-air summer cinemas. These were not just places to watch a movie. They were enchanted gardens enclosed by whitewashed walls. As soon as you walked in, you were wrapped in the heavy, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and sweet honeysuckle that climbed all over the screen. The entire audience sat on slightly uncomfortable canvas-director chairs, placed on loose white gravel. The soundtrack of the film always competed with the crunching sound of hundreds of people eating roasted pumpkin seeds and salty sunflower seeds, casually spitting the shells onto the ground. You would sip a freezing cold glass bottle of local orangeade while the movie played. Sometimes, the dramatic dialogue was interrupted by the loud noise of a passing motorcycle, a distant ferry horn, or a stray neighborhood cat casually strolling across the stage. It was a beautiful communal event. You did not just consume entertainment. You experienced the warm Greek summer night together with your neighbors, sharing collective laughter, tears, and gasps under a spectacular canopy of bright stars. Let us take a walk down memory lane to the local neighborhood grocery store and its most important object, the famous notebook. The small grocer was a magical, dimly lit place, filled with the sharp smell of feta cheese swimming in wooden barrels, mixed with the aroma of freshly ground coffee and yellow soap. The grocer knew absolutely everyone by their first name, and he knew their family histories too. You did not need cash to buy your daily bread, olives, or sugar. The transaction was built entirely on a foundation of profound trust. The grocer would reach under the counter, pull out a worn, grease-stained notebook, and simply write down what you took with a pencil. All neighborhood debts were settled at the end of the month, when the monthly salaries were finally paid. There were no plastic credit cards, no digital banking apps, just a handwritten promise on a piece of paper and a deep, unspoken mutual respect. It was a beautiful human safety net, ensuring that no family in the community ever went hungry during difficult weeks. Do you remember the thrilling daily arrival of the Iceman during the sweltering summer months? Before electric refrigerators hummed away in every single Greek kitchen, keeping food fresh required a daily delivery of massive, freezing blocks of ice. We would hear the heavy, rhythmic clip-clop of his horse-drawn cart, or the loud rumble of his small, dusty truck coming down the street. The Iceman was a figure of immense strength, carrying crystal-clear, heavy blocks of ice on his shoulder, protected from the freezing burn by nothing but a thick, wet burlap sack. He used giant, menacing iron tongs to slide the ice gently into the wooden iceboxes to save the milk and meat from spoiling. Neighborhood children would chase after his cart like it was a parade, eagerly begging for a small, sharp shard of ice to suck on to beat the terrible heat waves. It was a brief, refreshing burst of joy, a highly tactile memory of freezing water dripping onto the hot asphalt, a sensation completely vanished from our modern, climate-controlled existence. Sunday afternoons were defined by a very specific, crackling sound that drifted through the air. This was the era of the battery-powered transistor radio, permanently tuned to broadcast the local football matches. Men would sit on their shaded balconies or walk slowly down the street, holding these small, leather-encased radios pressed tightly against their ears. The silver antennas were fully extended, desperately trying to catch the elusive, fading signal from the stadium. The sports commentators spoke at a frantic, breathless pace. Suddenly, the entire neighborhood would echo with simultaneous, thunderous cheers or agonizing groans coming from dozens of little speakers when a crucial goal was scored. You could literally walk down any street in Athens or Thessaloniki and follow the entire match perfectly just by listening to the sound spilling out of open windows and cafe doors. It was a shared, invisible web of pure excitement that connected strangers, uniting the city through the magic of the invisible airwaves. Another deeply touching habit was the beautiful hospitality ritual of offering the traditional spoon sweet to anyone who crossed your threshold. Whenever a guest arrived, whether they were expected or completely unannounced, the woman of the house would immediately spring into action. She would present a gleaming silver tray carrying tiny, delicate glass plates. On each plate rested a single, perfect spoonful of preserved fruit. It could be bitter orange, sour cherry, or tiny green walnuts steeped in a thick, heavy, aromatic syrup. Alongside the sweet, there was always a tall glass of ice-cold water and a small, steaming cup of Greek coffee. You were meant to eat it very slowly, savoring the intense, sugary flavor while chatting. It was a powerful symbol of welcome, a traditional way to make the guester's life a little bit sweeter. Making these preserves took days of peeling, boiling, and waiting. It was a profound labor of love and patience that simply cannot be bought in a plastic jar from a modern supermarket. For the children of that era, life was lived entirely outdoors, primarily in the vacant dirt lots found in every neighborhood before the concrete apartment blocks took over the landscape entirely. Kids would gather in these dusty spaces every single afternoon after school. We only returned home when the streetlights flickered on in the dusk, or when our anxious mothers shouted our names from a fourth-floor balcony. We played fiercely, with scraped knees, tangled hair, and dusty shoes. We organized endless football matches, using large rocks for goalposts, played intense games of hide-and-seek, and jumped over elastic bands until our legs ached. There was absolutely no adult supervision, no scheduled playdates, and no protective gear. There was just raw, unbridled freedom. The vacant lot was our absolute kingdom, a chaotic, dusty paradise where we organically learned how to negotiate rules, how to make peace after a fight, and how to be truly, fearlessly alive in the real world. A very vivid memory for anyone who attended Greek public schools before 1982 is the mandatory blue uniform, affectionately known as the blue pinafore. Every morning, thousands of girls across the country buttoned up these dark blue dresses featuring a crisp, bright white collar, sometimes adorned with a small, carefully embroidered school emblem. The fabric was stiff and required constant ironing, and you had to struggle to keep it clean despite the chalk dust and playground dirt. While modern society might view uniform dress codes as a strict restriction of personal individuality, back then it served a remarkably powerful social purpose. It effectively erased deep economic boundaries. Rich or poor, privileged or struggling, every single student looked exactly the same when they walked into the classroom. It fostered a deep sense of equality and youthful solidarity. Taking off that blue uniform at the end of a long school day truly felt like shedding a second skin, marking the clear boundary between duty and freedom. Let us recall the magical time in the early 1970s when a television set was a rare, expensive luxury, a glowing piece of wooden furniture that commanded immense respect in the household. If only one family in the apartment building or the small village had a television, their private living room instantly transformed into a public cinema every evening. Neighbors would bring their own wooden chairs, arriving early to secure a good viewing spot. People sat in hushed, religious reverence, watching the black and white screen flicker with the evening news, or gripping their armrests during intense soap operas. Women often brought a plate of homemade cookies to share with the crowded room. We watched the glowing box together, we gasped at the plot twists together, and we passionately discussed the events for the rest of the week. In a beautiful twist of irony, early technology actually brought people into one single room, physically uniting them instead of isolating them in separate, lonely digital bubbles like today. We must also reflect on the meticulous, years-long preparation of a young woman out's dowry, an incredibly important tradition of the time. From a very young age, girls and their mothers would spend countless long winter evenings working with their hands. They embroidered pillowcases with intricate floral designs, crocheted delicate, complex lace doilies, and wove heavy, warm wool blankets on wooden looms. Every single finished piece was folded perfectly and stored carefully in a massive, carved wooden chest. When you opened that chest, you were hit with the overpowering nostalgic scent of dried lavender and harsh mothballs, used to protect the precious fabrics from insects. It was a profound, intergenerational transfer of art, immense patience, and motherly love. When the wedding day finally arrived, the entire handmade collection was proudly displayed for the whole village to admire. It was never just about material wealth. It was a physical testament to a woman's lifelong dedication and the immense care woven into every single stitch. Sunday mornings also featured a beautiful, incredibly fragrant parade down the neighborhood streets. In those days, many families did not roast their large Sunday meals in their own small kitchen ovens. Instead, mothers would prepare massive, round metal baking trays filled to the brim with stuffed tomatoes and peppers, or huge cuts of lamb and potatoes dripping with olive oil, garlic, and fresh lemon juice. Children were often tasked with carefully carrying these heavy, sloshing trays down the street to the local neighborhood baker. The baker would expertly slide dozens of these unique family meals deep into his giant, wood-fired oven. A few hours later, you would return to pick up your beautifully caramelized, perfectly roasted lunch. The entire street smelled of roasted meat and warm oregano. The bakery was not just a shop, it was the beating, fiery heart of the community, quietly cooking for everyone and bringing the neighborhood together through the shared love of a Sunday feast. Traveling to the distant provinces on the old, rattling green and cream buses was always an epic, exhausting adventure. These ancient vehicles were completely packed, not just with tired people, but with vibrant life. The narrow aisles were permanently blocked by heavy canvas bags, military duffels, and cardboard boxes tied tightly with thick twine. Sometimes there were even live chickens, safely tucked into woven baskets near the back seats. The roof racks were piled impossibly high, with luggage wrapped in plastic. The journey was terribly slow, winding through dangerous, narrow mountain roads. The air inside the cabin was impossibly thick, smelling strongly of diesel fumes, cheap tobacco smoke, and the sharp peppermint candies that strangers generously offered around to prevent terrible motion sickness. Despite the immense discomfort, you always ended up knowing the entire life story, the village origins, and the family tragedies of the person sitting next to you by the time you finally reached your destination. One of the most joyful and completely lost traditions is how we celebrated our name days. Birthdays were rarely a big deal, but your name day was a massive community-wide event. If your name was Yanis, Maria, or Georgios, it felt like half the country was celebrating alongside you. The most beautiful and absurd part of this tradition by today's standards was that doors were literally left unlocked. You absolutely did not wait for a formal invitation. If you knew someone celebrating, you simply dressed in your best clothes, bought a fancy white box of syrupy pastries wrapped in a virgin, and confidently knocked on their door. Living rooms were packed, shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, distant relatives, and passing acquaintances, all holding tiny, fragile glasses of sweet, colorful liqueur. The house became a loud, joyful, revolving door of smiling well-wishers from the early afternoon until late at night. It was an era of spontaneous, genuine hospitality and open doors that we have sadly lost entirely. A very specific sensory memory, entirely unique to the Greek summer, is the rustic smell of burning dry coffee. Before the convenient invention of electric plug-in repellents and chemical sprays, families had a very resourceful, traditional way of keeping aggressive wasps and annoying mosquitoes away from the evening dinner table on the balcony. Someone would carefully pour a small mound of dry, finely ground Greek coffee onto a small ceramic saucer, strike a match, and set the top of the mound on fire. The coffee did not burst into bright flames. Instead, it slowly smoldered, producing a thick, grey, heavily fragrant smoke that drifted across the table. That earthy, deeply roasted, slightly bitter smell mixed perfectly with the warm summer breeze and the scent of the nearby sea. It was a rustic, completely natural, and deeply atmospheric ritual. Even today, if you accidentally smell burnt coffee, you are instantly transported back to those carefree, magical August nights of your youth. For the young boys and girls growing up in the 60s and 70s, the absolute ultimate treasure was a small, cheaply printed comic book called The Little Hero. It told the thrilling, patriotic adventures of a young Greek boy bravely resisting the foreign occupation during the Second World War. These thin paperbacks were passionately passed from hand to hand until the pages literally fell apart from overuse. Reading them secretly under the wooden desk during a boring math class was a common, heart-pounding thrill. The schoolyards functioned as buzzing black markets during recess, where kids would intensely negotiate, trading two worn-out issues for one slightly newer one. The pages smelled distinctly of cheap printer ink and dusty trouser pockets. This comic was our collective modern mythology. It quietly taught an entire generation about bravery, sacrifice, and patriotism through incredibly simple drawings, creating an unbreakable bond among all the children who passionately followed the hero US journey. We must pay tribute to the traditional coffee house, the absolute epicenter of adult male social life in every village and neighborhood. It was a stark room, permanently filled with thick, swirling clouds of cigarette smoke, the sharp, unmistakable smell of anise from the ouzo, and the rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of amber worry beads flipping endlessly through calloused fingers. Men sat for hours on wobbly, straw-bottomed chairs around small, cold marble tables. They passionately debated national politics, discussed the upcoming olive harvest, or slammed down backgammon wooden pieces with dramatic, theatrical force. A man could easily spend 5 hours sitting there, slowly nursing a single, tiny cup of muddy Greek coffee, just to be an active part of the neighborhood brotherhood. It was the original, offline social club, a sacred space where strong opinions were forged, anger was vented, and community ties were deeply strengthened over endless arguments and shared, booming laughter. Let us remember the immense, painstaking dedication it took to record your favorite songs from the radio onto a blank plastic cassette tape. This was a true art form. You would sit cross-legged on the carpet, right next to the glowing stereo for hours, your finger hovering anxiously over the record and play buttons simultaneously. You waited patiently for the radio presenter to finally play that one specific track you loved, silently praying that he would not ruin it by talking over the intro. When you finally managed to compile a full mixtape of popular Greek pop and heavy Lyco music, it was considered a masterpiece, a labor of immense patience and perfect timing. We played these precious cassettes in the hot family car during long summer road trips. Sometimes the magnetic tape would tangle terribly inside the player, forcing us to pull it out and carefully wind it back up using a hexagonal pencil. Music felt incredibly precious back then, precisely because you had to work so hard to capture it. Finally, let us remember the most beautiful and perhaps the most deeply missed ritual of all, the Sunday evening promenade. As the sun slowly began to set and the terrible afternoon heat finally broke, the entire town would emerge from their homes, dressed perfectly in their absolute best clothes. Families, groups of teenagers, and older married couples would slowly walk up and down the main village square or the long harbour promenade. The purpose was not to go anywhere specific. The true purpose was simply to be seen, to warmly greet old friends, to nod respectfully to acquaintances, and for young, blushing people to exchange shy, fleeting glances away from their parents as watchful eyes. The evening air smelled wonderfully of expensive cologne, strong hairspray, and the salty sea breeze. It was the beautiful rhythm of a society that moved together, perfectly in sync, finding absolute, pure joy in the simple, elegant act of taking a walk side by side. It was the heartbeat of a community that still knew how to belong to one another. When we look back at these 20 habits, from the heavy wooden iceboxes to the crowded evening promenades, we realize something truly profound. We do not just miss the vintage objects or the old physical routines. What we are really grieving for is our youth, our unhurried sense of time, and the deep, unbreakable connection we once had with each other. We miss a world where doors were left unlocked and hearts were left open. Thank you so much for taking this emotional journey back in time with me. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly helps us keep this history alive. And now, I want to ask you, which of these 20 habits do you miss the absolute most? Or what is a ritual from your own childhood that the world has forgotten? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. I promise to read them all. Until next time, take care of yourselves and hold on to your precious memories.